A young frontier doctor risks everything to save a wounded Comanche warrior, and it costs her the respect and safety of her entire town. But what she doesn't know is that her act of compassion will come back to her in a way no one could predict. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked this story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. Sarah Blackwood stared out the window of her small cabin at the edge of Riverstone, Texas. The summer of 1875 brought stifling heat that clung to everything like a wet blanket. As the town's only female doctor trained by her physician father, before his passing, she lived a life of precarious respect. The townspeople needed her skills but distrusted a woman who dared practice medicine, Miss Blackwood. A frantic knock rattled her door. "Come quick. There's been trouble at the Garner farm." Sarah grabbed her medical bag and hurried outside to find young Tommy Garner, face streaked with dust and sweat. "What's happened?" "Pa shot someone," Tommy panted. "Says it's one of them Comanche. Ma says he's dying." Sarah's stomach tightened. Relations with the Comanche had been tense since the Red River War ended last year. Most tribes had been forced onto reservations, but some warriors refused to surrender. "Take me there," she said, mounting her mare. They rode hard through scrubland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. The Garner homestead appeared on the horizon, a modest wooden structure with a small barn and corral. Eliza Garner met them at the door, wringing her apron. "He's in the barn." John's standing guard. Inside the dim barn, John Garner stood with his rifle aimed at a figure sprawled on the hay. The wounded man, barely more than a boy, lay still, blood soaking through his buckskin clothing. "I caught him trying to steal horses," John said, not lowering his weapon. "Shot him before I realized what he was." Sarah knelt beside the injured Comanche. He couldn't be more than 20, with high cheekbones and long black hair. His eyes, clouded with pain, locked onto hers with a fierce intensity that made her breath. "Catch the bullets in his shoulder," she said, examining the wound. "I need to remove it before infection sets in." "Why bother?" John spat. "He's just an Indian. Let him die." Sarah stood, facing John squarely. "Every life has value, Mr. Garner. I took an oath to heal, not to judge who deserves saving." John scowled but stepped back. "Your funeral if he wakes. Up and scalps you." "Help me get him to my cabin," Sarah said. "I can treat him properly there." After much grumbling, John helped load the unconscious warrior into his wagon. The return journey was tense, with Sarah constantly checking her patient's pulse and breathing. At her cabin, Sarah worked through the night. She extracted the bullet, cleaned the wound with whiskey, and stitched it closed. The warrior burned with fever, occasionally muttering in his native tongue. Dawn broke as Sarah dozed in a chair beside her patient. A noise startled her awake. The Comanche was watching her, alert despite his pallor. "Water," she offered, helping him drink. "My name is Sarah. You're safe here." He regarded her silently before speaking in halting English. "Why help enemy?" "I'm a healer. You needed healing." He touched his bandaged shoulder. "I am Tabby, Running Fox," Sarah smiled. "Rest now, Tab. You need to regain your strength." Word spread quickly through Riverstone. By midday, Sheriff Mills was at her door. "Miss Blackwood, folks are saying you're harboring a savage," he said, hat in hand. "I'm treating an injured man, Sheriff. That injured man's people have killed settlers all across Texas." "And how many of his people have settlers killed?" Sarah countered. The sheriff sighed. "You know I respect your father's memory, but this town won't stand for it. Once he can ride, he needs to go." For 3 days, Sarah tended to Tabby. They developed a cautious understanding, communicating through his limited English and gestures. He told her about his family, his tribe's struggles, and the sacred lands they had lost. She shared stories of her father teaching her medicine when no medical school would accept women. On the 4th morning, Sarah woke to find Tab gone. On her table lay a small deerskin pouch containing a beautiful turquoise stone on a leather cord. Relief mingled with an unexpected sadness. That afternoon, Reverend Wallace stopped her in the street. "Miss Blackwood, I must speak with you about this heathen you've befriended." He was a patient reverend, nothing more. "You've brought danger to our doorstep," he proclaimed loudly, drawing attention from passers-by. "The Lord says we must not lie with the enemies of God's children. I did no such thing." Sarah felt her cheeks burn. "Your father would be ashamed." The reverend continued, "A respectable woman doesn't bring savage men to her home." By evening, the damage was done. Women pulled their children away as Sarah passed. The general store owner watched her suspiciously as she purchased supplies. Even Mrs. Peterson, who had gladly accepted Sarah's help during childbirth last winter, crossed the street to avoid her. Sarah returned home, fighting tears. On her porch step was a crude drawing of a woman with a noose around her neck. Beneath it, someone had written, "Indian lover." The curse of Riverstone had begun. 2 months passed, and Sarah's isolation grew more pronounced. Patients stopped coming, except in dire emergencies. When they did arrive, they refused to meet her eyes, taking her treatments with mumbled thanks before hurrying away. The whispers followed her everywhere: witch, savage lover, traitor. One crisp October morning, Sarah rode out to the Henderson farm to deliver Martha Henderson's baby. The labor had been difficult, but mother and daughter were now resting peacefully. As Sarah packed her supplies, Frank Henderson awkwardly counted coins into her palm. "Folks are talking nonsense," he said quietly. "You saved my Martha and the baby. That's what matters to me." Sarah smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Frank." As she rode home through golden fields of autumn grass, Sarah spotted riders on the horizon. Her heart quickened. 5 men on horseback, moving with purpose. She recognized Sheriff Mills and John Garner among them. They intercepted her path, forming a half-circle around her mare. "Miss Blackwood," the sheriff began, not meeting her eyes. "There's been Comanche raids on 3 farms north of here. 2 men dead, livestock stolen." "That's terrible," Sarah said. "But what does it have to do with me?" John Garner spat on the ground. "That savage you saved is probably leading them. Got the lay of our land while you nursed him." "Tob was alone and injured," Sarah protested. "He left months ago." "Maybe you've been signaling them," suggested another rider, a man named Peterson. "Helping them plan attacks." Sarah stared in disbelief. "That's absurd." "I'm a doctor, not a conspirator." "We're searching your cabin," the sheriff stated flatly. "If we find anything Indian, anything suspicious." "You'll what?" Sarah challenged, anger replacing fear. "Lynch me like your drawing suggested?" The men shifted uncomfortably, but none denied knowledge of the threat. "Just doing our duty," the sheriff muttered. They escorted her home and tore through her belongings. They found nothing incriminating except Tave's turquoise necklace, which Sarah had kept hidden in her father's old Bible. "What's this?" John demanded, dangling it before her face. "A gift." "A thank you for saving his life." "Witchcraft," Peterson hissed. "Indian magic." Sheriff Mills confiscated the necklace. "The town council wants to meet tomorrow. You'll be there to answer for your actions." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The turquoise had been precious to her, not for any magical properties, but because it represented one person who had shown gratitude when all others turned away. The town meeting was held in the church. Sarah sat alone at the front while Reverend Wallace led prayers, asking for protection from the savages among and around us. Judge Parker, who traveled the circuit, presided with obvious discomfort. "Miss Blackwood," he began, "you're accused of consorting with enemies of this community and possibly aiding in recent attacks. What say you?" Sarah stood, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I treated an injured human being, as my oath and conscience required. I've never aided any attacks." These accusations are born of fear and prejudice, not truth. Testimonies followed. Some, like the Hendersons, spoke of her medical skill and dedication. Others recounted rumors and suspicions, each more outlandish than the last. By the end, Sarah felt utterly drained. Judge Parker cleared his throat. I find no evidence of criminal activity. However, given the community's concerns, I recommend Miss Blackwood consider relocating her practice. You're banishing me? Sarah asked incredulously. For your own safety, the judge replied, not unkindly. Sentiments are running high. Sarah looked around at the faces she'd known her whole life, now twisted with suspicion and fear. Only a few showed sympathy or shame. This was my father's home, she said softly. I won't be driven out by ignorance. The next weeks brought escalating hostility. Her vegetable garden was trampled, windows broken. Leave was painted across her door. Sarah repaired what she could and carried on. Though patients were now almost non-existent. Winter arrived early, bringing bitter cold and howling winds. Sarah conserved her dwindling supplies and gathered firewood whenever the weather permitted. On the darkest December nights, loneliness pressed around her like a physical presence. One such night, as a blizzard raged outside, Sarah sat by her fire reading one of her father's medical journals. A noise at the door made her freeze, not a knock, but a scraping sound, heart-pounding. She grabbed her father's old pistol and approached cautiously. The wind masked any further sounds. Slowly, she opened the door. A figure lay collapsed on her porch, nearly covered by drifting snow. For one terrible moment, Sarah thought it was a dead body left as a threat. Then the figure moved slightly. Sarah dragged the person inside, closing the door against the howling wind. By the firelight, she gasped in recognition. It was Tab Barely, conscious, half-frozen, and clutching a bundle to his chest. You came back, she whispered. Tab, what happened to you? Sarah helped him to the fire, wrapping him in blankets. His lips were blue with cold, his body shaking violently. Soldiers, he managed through chattering teeth. Hunting us, many days running. Sarah worked quickly, checking for injuries while warming him gradually. He had frostbite on his fingers and toes, but nothing severe. Exhaustion and exposure were his main ailments. As Tav warmed, Sarah became aware of soft noises coming from the bundle he'd been protecting. Carefully, she pulled back the layers of animal hide to reveal a tiny face, a baby no more than a few months old, miraculously asleep despite the ordeal. A child? Sarah gasped. Whose baby is this? Tab's expression darkened with grief. My sister's son. Soldiers attack our camp. Sister dying. Give me boy. Say find medicine woman. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She sent you to me? Tab nodded. Tell others about kind healer. Say you have good heart. Sarah examined the infant. Despite his journey, he seemed healthy, hungry, and cold, but unharmed. She warmed some milk and showed Tab how to feed him with a cloth wick. What is his name? She asked. Tato, Little Eagle. For 3 days, Sarah kept Tab and the baby hidden. The blizzard provided cover, making it unlikely anyone would venture to her isolated cabin. She treated Tabe's frostbite and helped him regain his strength while teaching him how to care for Tato. On the 4th morning, Sarah woke to find Tabe standing by the window, watching the now gentle snowfall. He looked stronger, though sorrow still lined his face. My people scattered, he said quietly. Some go to reservation. Some still fight. No place safe for Tato. Sarah joined him at the window. What will you do? Tav turned to her, his dark eyes intense. Come to ask great favor. You keep Tato. Me? Sarah's heart skipped. Tab, I don't know if I can. You good woman. Teach him healing ways. Here he can live. The town already suspects me of conspiring with your people, Sarah explained. If they discover I'm raising a Comanche child, not raise as Comanche, Tab interrupted. Raise as your child. Tell them orphan from far place. The idea was both terrifying and strangely compelling. Sarah had long ago accepted she would never marry or have children. Her profession and independence ensured that. Yet the thought of raising this innocent boy stirred something profound within her. They would never believe he's mine, say sister's child. From far away, Sarah looked at the sleeping infant. He had already claimed a piece of her heart. What about you? He's your family. Toby's expression grew solemn. I go north. Find other bands. Fight soldiers. No life for baby. He reached into his clothing and withdrew something familiar, the turquoise necklace. Found in sheriff's office when scouting town. Take back. You risked yourself for this? Sarah asked, amazed. Medicine stone. Belonged to my grandmother. Give power to protect. He placed it in her hand. Now protect Tato. That night, Sarah made her decision. She would raise the child as her own, claiming he was her late sister's son from St. Louis. The town might suspect, but they couldn't prove otherwise. It would be difficult, perhaps dangerous, but she couldn't bear the alternative. The next morning, Sarah prepared supplies for Tabe's journey north: food, medicines, warm clothing. As they said goodbye, he touched his forehead to hers in a gesture of deep respect. Little Eagle now has big wings, he said, glancing at the baby in Sarah's arms. Someday I return. Sarah watched him disappear into the snowy landscape, wondering if she would ever see him again. Then she turned back to her cabin, to her new life as a mother. When the snow melted enough for travel, Sarah bundled Tato, now called Thomas, and journeyed into Riverstone. The stares and whispers followed her to the general store, where she calmly purchased baby supplies. Mrs. Miller, Sarah addressed the shopkeeper's wife directly. I'd like to introduce my nephew Thomas. My sister in St. Louis passed recently. God rest her soul, leaving the poor child orphaned. He's in my care now. Ellen Miller's curiosity visibly warred with her disapproval of Sarah. Curiosity won. Your sister? I didn't know you had family back east. We weren't close after she married, Sarah improvised. But blood is blood, and the child needs a home. Word spread quickly. Some openly doubted her story, particularly given the child's olive complexion. Reverend Wallace visited, ostensibly to offer condolences, but clearly to inspect the baby. He has a distinctive appearance, the Reverend noted with suspicion. My sister's husband was Italian, Sarah replied smoothly. Thomas takes after his father's coloring. Not everyone was convinced, but many townspeople scoffed at the sight of Sarah caring for a baby. Martha Henderson brought hand-me-down clothes from her own children. Dr. Wilson from the next town over, who had occasionally consulted with Sarah on difficult cases, began sending patients her way again. Folks respect a woman raising a child on her own, he explained during a visit. Shows character. Spring arrived, bringing new growth to match the new life in Sarah's home. Thomas thrived under her care, his bright eyes and ready smile winning over even reluctant visitors. Sarah found unexpected joy in motherhood, even with its challenges. One April afternoon, Sheriff Mills appeared at her door. Sarah tensed, instinctively moving to stand between him and Thomas's cradle. Miss Blackwood, he began awkwardly. There's been talk. There's always talk, Sheriff. He twisted his hat in his hands. The thing is, we found a dead Comanche scout 2 miles south of town last week. Had this on him. He held out a folded paper. Sarah took it with trembling fingers. It was a rough drawing of her cabin, with marks indicating the surrounding area. Some folks think he was planning to raid you, the sheriff continued. Others think, he trailed off, that I was helping him? Sarah finished bitterly. I don't know what to think anymore, Mills admitted. But I do know that ever since that first Indian showed up here, troubles followed you. From inside the cabin, Thomas began to cry. The sheriff's eyes darted to the sound. That baby, he said hesitantly. There's rumors. My nephew needs me, Sheriff. Sarah interrupted firmly. "If you've no official business, I'll bid you good day." After he left, Sarah sat holding Thomas, the turquoise necklace clutched in her free hand. The drawing troubled her deeply. Was it Tabe's way of mapping his return? Or was someone else watching her cabin? Either way, danger was circling closer. That night, Sarah made another decision. She couldn't leave her home, but she could make it safer. The next day, she hired 2 young men from town to build a sturdy fence around her property and repair her barn. She purchased a guard dog from a traveling trader. She began practicing with her father's pistol, improving her aim. Summer arrived, hot and dry. Thomas grew stronger daily, now sitting up and babbling happily. Sarah settled into a new rhythm of life, always watchful but determined to give her adopted son a loving home. Then came the drought. Weeks without rain left crops withering in the fields. Livestock grew thin, water sources dwindled. The town's mood darkened with desperation. "It's a punishment," Reverend Wallace declared from his pulpit. "The Lord withholds his blessing when sin dwells among us." Sarah knew who he meant. The old suspicions were resurging, fueled by hardship and fear. But this time, she had Thomas to protect. The drought stretched into its 6th week. Riverstone grew increasingly desperate as wells ran low and crops failed. Sarah rationed her water carefully, prioritizing Thomas's needs over her own. The small vegetable garden she'd replanted after. The trampling withered despite her efforts to save it. One scorching afternoon, Sarah was hanging laundry when she noticed dust on the horizon riders approaching. Her stomach knotted with apprehension. She quickly took Thomas inside, placing him in his cradle before retrieving her pistol. The riders' 5 men, including John Garner and Reverend Wallace, stopped at her gate. The Reverend dismounted, his expression grim. "Miss Blackwood," he called. "We need to speak with you." Sarah stepped onto her porch, keeping the pistol hidden in the folds of her skirt. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" "This drought is destroying our town," the Reverend said. "Families are suffering. Some say it's a judgment upon us." "I'm sorry for everyone's hardship," Sarah replied cautiously. "But I fail to see what that has to do with me." John Garner spat in the dust. "Indian magic. That stone you kept, it's brought a curse on our land." Sarah stared in disbelief. "You can't seriously believe a necklace caused the drought." "We've been too tolerant," Reverend Wallace continued as if she hadn't spoken. "First harboring a savage, now raising his offspring." Sarah's grip tightened on her pistol. "Thomas is my sister's child, and there's no such thing as curse magic." "Hand over the stone and the Indian baby," Garner demanded. "Then leave Riverstone for good." "Get off my property," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You're not taking my child or anything else from me." The men exchanged glances. One reached for his gun. "I wouldn't," Sarah warned, revealing her pistol. "I've gotten quite accurate with this." The standoff stretched for several tense moments before Sheriff Mills rode up, looking concerned. "What's happening here?" he demanded. "Just talking, Reverend," Wallace said smoothly, "about the drought and its causes." The sheriff surveyed the scene, noting Sarah's defensive posture and the men's hostile expressions. "Looks like more than talking to me. You men head back to town now. Reverend, you should be praying for rain, not bothering Miss Blackwood." After the men reluctantly departed, the sheriff remained. "They're scared," he explained, not meeting Sarah's eyes. "When people get scared, they look for someone to blame. And I'm convenient," Sarah said bitterly. "I can't always be riding out here to intervene," he warned. "Be careful, Miss Blackwood." That night, Sarah barely slept, keeping watch with her pistol nearby. Thomas slept peacefully, unaware of the danger surrounding them. As dawn approached, Sarah made up her mind. She couldn't leave. This was her home, her father's legacy. But she needed allies. The next day, she visited the Hendersons, bringing medicine for their youngest child's cough. As Martha prepared coffee, Sarah cautiously broached the subject. "Some men came to my cabin yesterday," she began. "They believe Thomas and I are somehow responsible for the drought." Martha's hand stilled. "Frank told me. He thinks it's nonsense." "Would Frank say so publicly? I fear for Thomas's safety." Martha hesitated, then nodded firmly. "Frank stands by those who've helped us. I'll speak to the other women too. Mrs. Peterson owes you for saving her Johnny from scarlet fever last year." Over the next few days, Sarah visited other families she had treated, rebuilding connections one conversation at a time. Not everyone welcomed her, but enough did that she felt slightly safer. A week later, clouds finally gathered on the horizon. The town held its breath, praying for relief. When the first drops fell, people ran into the streets, faces turned upward in gratitude. The rain continued for 2 blessed days, refilling wells and reviving withered crops. The timing couldn't have been more fortunate for Sarah. It thoroughly undermined the curse theory. Even Reverend Wallace had difficulty maintaining that position when questioned by his newly optimistic congregation. As summer turned to fall, hostility towards Sarah gradually decreased. Thomas's first birthday approached, marked by his first tottering steps across the cabin floor. Sarah celebrated quietly, making a small cake and giving him a wooden horse she'd carved herself. On that crisp October evening, as Thomas slept and Sarah sat by the fire mending, a soft knock sounded at her door. Her hand moved automatically to her pistol before approaching cautiously. "Who's there?" she called. "Friend," came the reply in a familiar accent. Sarah's heart leaped. She opened the door to find Tabby standing there, his appearance much changed. He wore settler's clothing, trousers, a worn coat, a hat pulled low over his still long hair. Only his dark eyes were unchanged, watching her intently. "You came back," she whispered, echoing her words from nearly a year before. Tob nodded. "Promised I would. How is little Eagle?" Sarah ushered him inside, where he gazed in wonder at the sleeping child. Thomas had grown considerably, his black hair thick, his features showing hints of his Comanche heritage, though softened by babyhood. "He is strong," Tob observed proudly, "like his mother was." "He's walking now," Sarah told him, "and trying to talk. He's very clever." Tob listened to her stories of Thomas's development with evident emotion. Then he shared his own journey, how he had traveled north but found his people's situation desperate everywhere. How he had eventually made a difficult decision. "I cannot fight anymore," he explained. "Too many die. Future is changing. Must change with it." From his pocket, he produced a folded paper. Sarah recognized it as the map the sheriff had shown. "You drew this?" "To find way back," Tob confirmed. "Lost in snowstorm. Hunter found it on me when I scouted town last winter." "The sheriff thought it was proof I was helping raid the town," Sarah said. "It nearly brought disaster." Tob looked troubled. "Not want to bring danger. Come now with news and gift." He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. Inside was a handful of seeds, medicine plants, he explained. "From my people. Good for fever, pain, many sicknesses. Show you how to grow, how to use." Sarah examined the seeds with professional interest. "This is a precious gift. Thank you." "Not only gift," Tob continued. "Bring knowledge too. And ... He hesitated. "If you allow, visit Little Eagle sometimes. Tell him stories of his people." Sarah considered the risks, but looking at Tabby's sincere expression, she couldn't refuse. "Where will you go?" "Found work with cattle drive. Moving north. Will return when can." Before dawn, Tob departed with a promise to return in spring. Sarah watched him go with mixed emotions, gratitude for his gifts, concern for his safety, and a newfound hope. The seeds represented not just new medicines, but a bridge between worlds, knowledge preserved and shared rather than lost. The following Sunday, Sarah attended church for the first time in months. Thomas dressed in his best clothes. Whispers followed them down the aisle, but several families nodded in greeting. Martha Henderson patted the space beside her, making room for Sarah and Thomas. That Reverend Wallace paused momentarily upon seeing them, then continued his sermon. Sarah listened politely, holding Thomas on her lap. When the service ended, she approached the Reverend directly. "My father always said healing comes in many forms," she told him. "Sometimes through medicine, sometimes through understanding. I'd like to donate these medicinal herbs to the church's charity work." She handed him a small package of dried plants, not Tobe's sacred seeds, but common herbs with healing properties. The Reverend accepted the peace offering with visible surprise. "Thank you, Miss Blackwood." As they walked home, Thomas babbling happily in her arms, Sarah felt a weight lifting. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Riverstone's memory was long, and prejudice died slowly. But she had created something precious. A home where different worlds could meet, where ancient wisdom could blend with new knowledge. That evening, Sarah sat on her porch watching the sunset, Thomas playing at her feet. Around her neck hung the turquoise necklace, no longer hidden. Let people talk. She knew its true value, not as magic, but as a symbol of trust between unlikely friends. In the distance, beyond the newly harvested fields, the open prairie stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, Tob was making his way in a changing world. Someday he would return, bringing more stories, more knowledge. And Thomas would grow, understanding both sides of his heritage, stronger for the blend rather than diminished. Sarah smiled, touching the smooth stone at her throat. The greatest gift hadn't been the turquoise or the medicinal seeds. It had been the chance to build a bridge where others saw only walls, to create family where others saw only enemies. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah whispered a promise to the night. "We'll be waiting."